Wife's AP attacked our son, part 2 of 2. The not petty and rude part of me finally asked her if she wanted to talk. I needed to set some expectations with Emma if we would try and make these living arrangements work. Emma said yes, and we went to the living room to chat. Emma asked me about what was going on in my personal life, claiming she wanted to know for the kids' sake. Yeah, I'm not that clueless. Emma wanted to know because she was jealous. I took a deep breath and decided to open up to her. I told her that I needed to see what dating was like since I worried her cheating would break my ability to trust. This caused Emma to start staring at the floor again. I spent an hour talking honestly to her about what happened to me after finding out about her affair. There were times in the conversation when the raw emotion of dealing with and expressing my feelings had my own tears flowing. I had been either cold or angry in every conversation with Emma since D-Day. This was the first time she saw what her infidelity had done to me. She kept trying to come to me and hold me, but I wouldn't let her. Whenever she saw tears from me, she would start bawling so hard she would gasp for air. Part of me was glad she was hurting, and part was mad that I was hurting her. Unlike Emma, I never stopped loving my wife. My heart aches whenever I see her. When I finally asked Emma to tell me why she cheated, she didn't respond right away. Eventually, she stepped up to me, saying she was stupid and shallow and acted self-centered. She said she had no excuse other than it started slow, and each increment didn't seem like it was much more than what she had already done. Eventually, she had crossed a line without any consequences because our home life was the same. She just let herself enjoy the attention and the praise of AP. She told me she had nobody to blame for all the pain she inflicted but herself. I asked her why she was so adamant about staying in our guest suite, and she said it was for the kids. After looking up at me and finally looking at me in the eyes, she also did it because she planned to win her family back. When I started to object, she held up her hand and said she knew how I felt and how angry I was, and she said she expected the price to be high to gain my trust back. She looked me in the eyes and said she would do whatever it takes. There was no pleading or begging in what she said. It was just a look of determination. I laughed at her and said good luck with that with genuine humor. She smiled at me and said she couldn't allow me to get too close to any other woman. I objected to that and told her I was not planning on stopping. Emma smiled sadly and returned to her side of the house. Jess always leaves the door open when she sees her mom or returns to my side of the house. I would always close and lock the door, but decided that after my talk with Emma, she wasn't going crazy, so I left the door unlocked and sometimes open. Emma never crossed into my side of the house without first asking me. I never objected because she always had a good reason, like offering to make dinner for Jess and me. Jay was hardly ever home, and Emma seemed to honor his decision not to interact with his mom. Emma and I eventually got to a place where we were okay to be around each other as much as two exes could be. When Jay graduated high school, we discovered he was accepted into his preferred college. Thankfully, we were flush with cash from the settlements, and Jay left for college as soon as the dorm opened. It dawned on me that Emma was home a lot recently, so the next time I saw her via our open door policy, I casually asked if she was taking time off work. She got an annoyed look on her face, and I thought I had crossed a line. But as it turned out, Emma had filed her own lawsuit against her company and Rob. After looking back at the situation, Emma could see that Rob had used his position to facilitate what had happened, and he had also given her a bonus that was outside of normal ranges for the work. She went after the firm because it was common knowledge by other partners what was happening, and bonuses had to be approved by the full board. Emma told me that they were negotiating the payout since the firm didn't want the publicity. Emma was annoyed that they were trying to get her to agree not to disclose the nature of the final settlement. I laughed at that and said, "Good. I hope you take it all." She smiled at me, turned around, and said, almost over her shoulder. I periodically closed the door and locked it when Colette was coming over. I also made sure that the kids weren't home. Jess was easy since she would happily be at her mom's side. I told Jess that if the door was locked, I had a friend over and asked if it was okay for her to stay with her mom. Jess wasn't too little to understand that Emma and I were divorced, but she always did her best to try and get us into the same room. Kids. One day when I was getting ready for a date with Colette, Emma came over a couple of hours before I left for the date. Colette and I had gotten into a routine of going out to lunch or dinner, taking in a show or concert, and then ending up at my place. Emma knocked on the door frame and called out to me. I was in the kitchen and called out to her to come in. Emma walked into the kitchen and talked to me about buying some new clothes and wanted my opinion. My back was to her as I was rinsing out my glass. I put it into the rack and turned to my ex-wife. Shocked was the only word I could find to explain what I saw. Emma stood before me wearing a white silk teddy and fishnet stockings. She was just standing there with her hands on her hips, looking into my eyes. It was hard not to look. I should say it was impossible for me not to look. Emma was a stunningly attractive woman who checked all the boxes for me. I remembered what she said about buying clothes and tried to say something, but I couldn't get any words out. She raised her arms to the sides and did a slow turn, asking me if I liked it. I was able to croak out something like, "Yeah, it looks great." She smiled, said, "Thank you," and walked back to her side. I stared. When she got back to her side, she turned back and smiled. I was weak, and she knew I looked at her. She just stood there at the door to her side, giggling. I walked down to the door, entering her side, and she did the crooked finger to follow her, and yes, I did. We spent 30 minutes in the most intense physical interaction we'd had in the last 5 years when we were still married. I returned to my part of the house and showered, then called Colette and told her I couldn't meet with her that evening. She said she'd take a rain check, and I felt like crap. We weren't exclusive, it was more of a FWB and hanging out. Colette had told me early on that she had made the decision to stay single until the kids left for college. Yeah, my ex-wife started seducing me before I went on any date. My daughter would always clue her in when I was planning to go out. This became a game for Emma, and she would come over wearing something that showed off her best attributes and then invite me to her place. I guess sating my libido was her way of reducing the chance that my date was more than just food and a movie. I started making up date nights since she wanted to play that game. Over the next 6 months or so, Emma finally called for a family meeting. Jay wasn't there because he was still away at college. So Emma, Jess, and I sat around the kitchen table eating dinner and chatting. When we were done with dessert, Emma said she wanted to discuss something with our family. She looked nervous, and I could tell she had to steel herself before talking. Jess came to me and sat on my knee, hugging me. That made the alarm bells go off. Emma looked at me and placed a pregnancy test on the table before me. I was shocked, picked it up, and looked. The test was what you expected. When I looked back at Emma, she had tears flowing and her entire body was shaking. All I could say was, "Oh." Emma stood, stepped to us, and knelt, putting her head in Jess's lap, who was still sitting on me. Jess said, "Dad, Mom told me I'm going to have a baby brother or sister." I said, "Well, it sure looks that way. Are you ready to be a big sister?" Jess laughed and said, "Yes." I guess now is the best time to address the elephant in the room. For those of you who might be a bit dense, I had already decided to accept Emma back into our lives. This doesn't mean I will forget what she did, and a part of me will probably never fully forgive her for the hurt she caused me and the kids, but I love Emma, and I can see the effort she's been putting in for most of a year. I looked down at Emma, her face turned up to me, and told her, "I guess we need to talk about you moving home." Emma stood up, wrapped her arms around me, and cried again. The women in my life seem to have gotten the better of me. We'll just go with that. Emma and I had a very candid conversation after Jess went to bed later that night. Emma asked me if I was upset by the pregnancy, and I told her truthfully, no, and that I wasn't too surprised since we didn't take any precautions. She asked if that meant I was ready to forgive her. Again, I was honest and told her that I had always loved her and was still in love with her, but she needed to understand that trust doesn't just reappear because of love. She got that sad look on her face again and started looking down. I told her to look at me, and she looked up, holding my eyes. Then I told her I was willing to give our relationship another try, but held up a hand as she started to smile. I told her we would start dating again and that she needed to prove she was committed to me. She looked confused and started to object when I pointed out that being committed to our family was different. She would always love the kids, but had to be committed to me. She nodded and promised me she would be with all her heart. She said all the right things and held me tight. I then told her she wouldn't like my next two conditions. She said anything. I told her first that she needed to sign a marriage contract that would be brutal to her if she ever strayed again. She said yes without pause. I guess the logical lawyer in her forgot to take over. Then my second condition was that she needed to get Jay's approval before I would ever remarry her. I hadn't figured out the emotion on her face, but it looked like dread. She agreed to that also. I threw her a bone and told her I would call and tell Jay we had started seeing each other. I would tell him that we will start over and see where our relationship goes and that I would not force him to accept the new relationship. But I would expect him to be civil and not try to stop us. She looked a bit relieved and thanked me. She asked who was going to tell him about the baby. I looked at her and said, "Let Jess do it." Emma laughed at that, since Jay adored his little sister, and it would be hard for him to be upset because she was so happy. Emma took a deep breath and said that she had a condition she wanted. I laughed and said, "Oh?" She grabbed my crotch and told me no more dates. I looked at her like I was confused, then asked her what she was talking about because I hadn't gone on a date in over 6 months, since she seduced me that first time with a sly smile. The truth of what I'd been doing dawned on her, and she screamed at me and started laughing. To cap this all off, when Jay was home from school over the summer, I sat him down and told him that I wanted to go on vacation as a family. He got a stiff look on his face, so I raised my hand to pause what he was going to say and just asked for me to please consider this. We talked for over an hour about what happened between me and his mother since he was at school. He did get a little grin when I told him that his mom started to seduce me when she thought I was going on dates. He gave a little laugh and said, "Dad, please don't talk to me about you and Mom having sex. That's just gross. And it was hard enough to process when Jess told me Mom was pregnant again." Jay ended up going out to a local park with his mom to talk about everything. Jay finally got to express himself, and Emma had another tough day, but Jay needed to get it off his chest. There are still some guarded feelings there, but Jay doesn't treat her like the enemy now. When Jay asked me later if his mom and I would get married again, I laughed and said, "Well, son, that's up to you." He asked, "Why?" I explained my condition to his mom. He said, "Dad, that's your decision. I don't want to be in the middle of that." I told him I had forgiven her for what she did, but everyone had to be on board for us to be a family again. Then I told him he would have to do some soul-searching and make his own peace. This was a long time ago, and we went on that family vacation and many more. Both the kids are older now and have their own families. Emma and I are still going strong, and we are expecting our third grandchild. May peace follow you through your lives, and I wish you all the very best in your own relationships. I only post unique new content. Please like and subscribe.